The next item of business this afternoon is a debate on motion number 8480 in the name of Stewart Maxwell on decision-making on whether to take children into care. Could I ask members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now, please? And I call on Stewart Maxwell to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the Education and Culture Committee. Mr Maxwell, around 13 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate comes soon after the Stage 1 debate on the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. That discussion demonstrated strong cross-party support for the bill's broad aims of effective early intervention and better support for our children and young people. Several members also stressed their commitment to making the bill even stronger and to ensuring the legislation delivers real improvements in people's lives. I want today's debate to build on these statements and aspirations, and for us all to consider how we can improve outcomes for looked-after children and young people in particular. To be blunt, that may not be too difficult. Our inquiry confirmed again that many young people who have been in care have worse educational outcomes than other children. Many also have poorer health, are more likely to become homeless or to become involved in the criminal justice system. While the committee is united in its view that further improvement is necessary, it is encouraging that so much activity is underway to improve outcomes for young people. The Minister will no doubt wish to highlight the various measures the Scottish Government is taking, as set out in its response to our report. We welcome such measures, but I will use this debate to push the Scottish Government for more detail on some of our recommendations. I also hope the debate will inspire other members and other committees to consider their role in improving outcomes. However, before getting into the detail of our recommendations, I will provide the Chamber with some background on what was a complex and relatively long-running inquiry. Our remit was to consider the decision-making processes involved in determining whether or not a child should be removed from the family home and taken into care. More importantly, we also asked whether these processes are delivering the best outcomes for children and their families. We took an enormous amount of evidence across a wide range of decision-making processes, such as social work and the children's hearings and child protection systems, and I wish to thank everybody who submitted evidence to us. We took evidence about and from children who have been in care, who were looked after at home, or who may be at risk of becoming looked after. Our remit developed throughout as we continually sought to focus on areas where we considered the need for improvement was strongest. Although we are debating the committee's final report, we also published an interim report to make sure that all the very many concerns raised with us were not lost. In order to frame our debate, I wish to make it clear that nobody who contributed told us that the current system of child protection and welfare was broken or should be abolished, and a completely new system should be established instead. That said, there were suggestions for improvement across virtually every area we looked at. Put starkly, we consider that current decision-making processes are not always delivering the best outcomes for children and their families. That view was heavily shaped by the children and young people we spoke to, many of whom had harrowing stories to tell. Presiding Officer, in Scotland we talk a lot about putting children and young people at the centre of decision-making. According to the young people we met, however, we don't always deliver on that promise. That's why we were so determined to place the views and real-life experiences of young people right at the heart of our report. When teenagers who have been in care tell elected politicians that they were left too long at home when they should have been taken into care, there is a considerable responsibility on us all to listen and to respond. The problem those teenagers described is very easy to repeat to the Chamber, but it is by no means easy to solve. Their concerns go to the heart of a highly contentious issue, such as the right of the state to intervene in family life and how professionals make decisions about them. Another aim of our inquiry was to encourage a public and media discussion of issues around care. We often hear very little about child welfare and protection until something has gone wrong. We wanted to encourage a debate on matters such as why some children are taken into care but others are looked after at home, on whether general assumptions can ever be made about the fitness to parent, and on whether there is a consistent decision-making process across the country. These questions can be hugely controversial, sensitive and indeed difficult, but rational public discussion can help them to make them less so. I think it's worth providing a brief example of how our current approach to children at risk of coming into care is of considerable public interest. Without commenting on the actual merits of this development, earlier decision-making is resulting in more children coming into care at a younger age, what the Scottish Government considers to be a positive development. We need to be aware of and debate such changes and be very alive to how they may impact on society. Having provided the background, I will now highlight some of our main conclusions and recommendations. I will focus on vision, resources, early interventions and the respective roles of the Scottish and local government. Above all, I will focus on outcomes. No one could question the amount of activity underway to improve the position of looked after children. Apart from the Children and Young People Bill, the Scottish Government's response alone mentions a forthcoming care and permanence strategy, efforts to map the processes and bodies involved in decision-making, a review of statistics on looked after children, and indeed several other pieces of work. We appreciate the efforts across the public and third sectors to reform the child protection and welfare system, and indeed acknowledge that some improvements will take time to manifest. However, our report highlighted the danger that the sheer volume of ongoing work could give the impression that deep-rooted problems are being addressed on an incremental basis. The committee also wanted a reassurance that all the reforms are being coordinated, that key findings will be acted upon and that they will result in better outcomes. In seeking to improve looked after children's outcomes, we have to know their current outcomes and the outcomes that are expected. The Minister, I think, quite correctly considered that it is too crude to judge success for looked after children in terms of the numbers of children being taken into care. She called for a better, more rounded picture of a looked after child's well-being to gauge whether an intervention has been successful. The Scottish Government's response to a report stated that there are some encouraging signs that outcomes are improving gradually across almost all indicators. I would indeed welcome further detail from the Minister about which outcomes are improving and also the ways in which life chances will continue to get better as a result of the current reforms. Given the complexity of current decision-making processes, the number of bodies involved and the ongoing reforms, our report called on the Scottish Government to establish a shared vision of what success would look like for looked after children and ensure that resources and processes are built around that vision. The Scottish Government has been commendably clear in stating that the policy aim is early permanence, which it considers will help reduce the number of children on long-term supervision requirements and increase the numbers finding secure legal permanence. I am sure the Minister will indeed expand on this aim in her speech. In doing so, it would be very helpful if she could discuss the bigger picture outcomes that this will deliver. Will we see improved educational attainment and better health and employment prospects, for example? I'd also welcome an assurance from the Minister that the ongoing reforms will involve children and young people themselves. No one can speak with more authority about what improvements are still required. Not surprisingly, the issues of resources featured in both our interim and our final report. For example, we questioned the Scottish Government on evidence suggesting that decisions about removing children from the family home were affected by the availability of appropriate placements. Given changing demographic patterns and the strong policy emphasis on the early years and preventative spending, we also asked for projections of the future balance of care, that is, the likely number of children requiring to be taken into care. At a time of budgetary pressures, it is critical that we know the level of current spending, what that is delivering, and whether spending is achieving optimal results. We therefore ask the Scottish Government to calculate the total sum of money all relevant bodies spend on protecting children and whether this spend is providing value for money. The Minister made clear the difficulties of disentangling spending in this way, but said the total that can possibly be spent on children's services is around £2.5 billion. In response to our requests on planning and resources, the Scottish Government emphasised its view that understanding spending and need is best determined at the local level. That said, the Government did set out how it is supporting local authorities to promote strategic commissioning. Again, I am sure the Minister may wish to expand on that approach in her contribution. Now, our report concluded, however, that we still do not know whether current public spending on supporting and protecting children was delivering value for money. However, we do consider that existing resources, people, financial and time, could be used more effectively. Several witnesses told us, for example, that too many people are involved in the decision-making process. We also recommended that all the ongoing reforms should take value for money fully into account and would welcome the Minister's reassurance on that point. There is a specific aspect of the resources discussion that I want to highlight, however. The Scottish Government's focus on early intervention and preventative spending has been widely discussed inside and outside Parliament, and there is indeed, of course, broad support for such principles. The Scottish Government considers that while early intervention may lead to an initial rise in children becoming looked after, it can also help to ensure that fewer children are looked after in the longer term. In the light of this trend and the strong emphasis on the financial benefits to be derived from early intervention, we asked for an analysis of the likely delivery and financial implications for service providers. And again, I would welcome further details that the Minister could provide on this point. In recognition of its leadership role, our recommendations were aimed primarily at the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government's response makes clear its role in holding partners to account in ensuring we deliver excellence and in helping service providers to set the policy and resource framework. We are, of course, fully aware that improvements to decision-making and outcomes will rely heavily on the input of those working at a local level. However, it would be helpful to have clarity around lines of responsibility and accountability, given that the Scottish Government has indeed a leadership role, while local authorities have a delivery role. To illustrate, our report raised some concerns about social workers, namely threats to their postgraduate training and Council's ability to retain experienced staff on the front line. We were concerned by the claim by the Scottish Association of Social Work that social work training departments have, and I wish to quote here, disappeared as a result of the cuts that have happened to local government, and another quote, that post-qualification training is now disappearing. Given social workers' fundamental role in bringing about improvements, we asked for detailed information on the impact of the local government settlement on their post-qualification training and career development. We also asked the government to confirm the action it would take should the evidence substantiate the claims that were made. We note the Scottish Government's view that matters of social work delivery, training and support are indeed for local authorities. However, it would be helpful if the Minister could respond to this recommendation and the claims in her speech. To conclude, Presiding Officer, children who have been in care do not simply need to do better at school. They need to enjoy better health, they need to have more stable and better quality accommodation, they need to be far less likely to become involved in the criminal justice system. These are hugely challenging problems, and it is to the credit of this Parliament and our wider society that so many people are investing time and effort in trying to do better by some of our most disadvantaged fellow citizens. Our inquiry was immensely challenging and at times very emotional, and left the committee with somewhat mixed feelings. Yes, we welcome the widespread efforts across government, the public and indeed the third sectors to improve decision-making processes and outcomes for children and young people. However, the rate of improvement we are seeing is still too slow, considering the amount of effort and resources committed over a long period of time. As we concluded in our report, too many children have been left for too long in unsuitable home environments. Too few children move quickly enough into stable, loving homes and go on to enjoy the same life chances as other children. The Education and Culture Committee will maintain its commitment to these children and young people. We will get updates from the Scottish Government on the outcomes that all the activity described in our report is helping to deliver. And when we do so, we will speak again to those most directly affected by these reforms, namely the children and young people themselves. Presiding Officer, I wish to conclude by moving the motion in my name on behalf of the Education and Culture Committee. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Aileen Campbell. Minister, you have around 9 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome this afternoon's debate brought forward by the Education and Culture Committee following their recent inquiry, and I congratulate them on their work and know that we all share a passion for doing the very best we can for the young people we are tasked with looking after. And I want to touch upon the themes within the committee's report and to comment on the action that we are taking. The Scottish Government believes every child has the right to expect the very best start in life, to be safe, to be happy and nurtured in their own families, in loving and stable homes with parents with ambition and aspirations for their children, to have all those things that any parent would seek to provide for their child. But there will always, unfortunately, be some children whose well-being depends upon alternative care. For these children, we need to make early and effective decisions to promote stability. We need to be planning for and making decisions about their long-term futures as soon as they come into the looked-after system. The Children and Young People Bill, amongst other things, aims to make public services more responsive to needs and sensitive to working with families in order to better support our most vulnerable children and young people. The committee's work is therefore useful and timely in terms of setting the scene for looked-after children ahead of stage 2.
Neil Findlay.
One of the ways to help particularly young children is through childcare. Today we learned that the Scottish Government will receive £300 million in consequentials from the UK Government. Can the Minister commit to putting some of that money into childcare for some of the youngest and most vulnerable children?
Minister.
We've made very clear within our bill our commitment to supporting children in their earliest years, and have set out aspiration with 600 hours for looked after 2-year-olds, and also set very clearly our wider aspirations in terms of childcare, which the member can read in the white paper if he would like to read it. The importance of improving corporate parenting. I think Neil Findlay needs to really consider his tone as well during this debate, which is about trying to work constructively together on this important issue. Now, the importance of improving corporate parenting is a crucial element of this bill, as it encompasses all areas of our work, demanding we get things right for those in our care. Putting GIRFEC on a statutory footing also provides a mechanism for early and effective intervention, and its principles underpin absolutely everything that we do. It places children at the heart of design and delivery of services, aids improvement in permanence planning and delivery, and importantly, values the voice of the child. There are encouraging signs that outcomes are improving gradually across almost all indicators. For instance, the main findings from the most recent publication on Scotland's looked after children show that looked after young people who leave school are increasingly entering positive destinations. And 75% of looked after young people who left school during 11-12 were in a positive destination 3 months after they left school. Children's social work stats also show the rate of increase in the total number of looked after children continues to slow, but on its own, earlier and more frequent interventions can result in more children coming into care. In particular, becoming looked after at home, where the challenges around improving outcomes for this group are well known. Therefore, the partner policy aim here is early permanence. Both early intervention and early permanence are needed to meet our aims of reducing the number of children on long-term supervision requirements and increasing the numbers finding secure legal permanence. Focusing on these two areas in the years ahead will achieve a system of intervention and substitute care that wraps around the child, a system that is effective, affordable and swift. The benefits of investing in early intervention are fully realised when quality services are provided. We know all about the positive societal, emotional, educational and health impacts early intervention has, as well as the economic evidence that for every £1 invested in cause can save £9 in cure. We are seeing a trend for children becoming looked after younger, showing that social workers are acting more quickly to assess and intervene. And we believe social workers are right to take early decisions about children becoming looked after. We know from our work with the sector, such as through the practice exchange workshops delivered by Celsius, that social workers are increasingly feeling confident about making use of relevant evidence from previous interventions with families to hasten timescales for subsequent children. We support that approach. We want families to thrive and not just survive. We're also making progress on permanence, with the number of children adopted from care increasing and the number of permanence orders rising year on year since their introduction. However, too many children are still remaining on supervision for far too long, with all the uncertainty and distress that goes with that. So, reflecting our commitment to permanence, we will be publishing a care and permanence strategy in the coming months that will set out the strategic framework for our work. It will recognise that far-reaching improvements in delivering early permanence for children can only be made by taking a whole-system approach, involving all those who contribute to the permanence process. This includes social workers and wider community planning partnerships, children's hearings and the courts, and it will also include the voice of the child. We're also launching a Permanence and Care Excellence PACE programme. This will work in 2 geographical areas, using improvement science to develop improvement projects looking at all aspects of a child's journey to permanence. It will focus on the children's experience, bringing together local authorities, children's hearings and the courts to identify barriers and delays and develop and test solutions. These programmes will provide a powerful opportunity to deliver real improvement on the ground. And by bringing the relevant partners together, the projects will address the interactions between systems and delivering permanence, enable us to share learning across Scotland. Presiding Officer, I want to turn my focus now onto the workforce. The Scottish Government's approach to improving the quality of children's social services centres on the needs of the child, the support given to professionals to make good judgments, and on continuously learning from what works. The Scottish Government fully realises the importance of developing this competent, confident and valued workforce, as evidenced through the work of the Scottish Social Services Council and the investment that we make in other organisations such as the Institute for Research and Innovation in Scotland and the Centre for Excellence for Looked After Children in Scotland. The SSSC provides various means of support to the sector and is taking forward, in partnership with a range of stakeholders, 2 further strands of activity to progress and support workforce development. This work will see development of a national learning strategy for all practitioners, which will provide a framework for learning at both qualifying and post-qualifying levels, and a career development pathway to support learning and skills throughout their career. They will also carry out a review of the social work degree to ensure that it continues to meet the needs of students and employers both now and in the future. And furthermore, I, along with the Chief Social Work Advisor, have established a Social Work Strategic Forum, which brings together partners from across academia, the unions, the regulators and ADSW. And this will allow us to strategically move the sector forward and include workforce support, amongst other things. And it will also include continued engagement with frontline practitioners. The inquiry also highlighted the need for more detailed information to be collected to provide a fuller picture of looked after children's outcomes and allow for judgments to be made on whether interventions have been successful. The Scottish Government is currently working to review children looked after statistics data in order to ensure the data that we collect can be analysed to inform practitioners and policy making. The review is due to be completed by the end of the year and should contribute towards our understanding of the service delivery and also help us to articulate and anticipate financial implications for service providers. So, Presiding Officer, the committee's attention and report have been incredibly useful in ensuring that we don't take the foot off the gas when it comes to ensuring the very best for our looked after children and young people. The committee has indicated, and so too the convener, that the systems and policies we have should not be abolished. What I believe we must do, however, is allow our approaches time to gain ground and achieve the desired culture change and associated improvements. The challenge is about mobilising our combined effort and resources more effectively and directing more of it at families earlier to make it easier for practitioners to deliver involved family support. GIRFIC is the policy and strategic framework overlaying our approach to all children in need or at risk. And there are a range of interactions between concerned agencies, but what should unite them is their fundamental belief that every child has the right to expect the best start in life. So this is a difficult and it is an incredibly complex subject area, but what I don't doubt is the passion and commitment of everyone in this chamber and across the relevant sectors to do our utmost to inculcate change and demand improvement. This is too important to get wrong and we cannot be content with mediocrity. And I look forward to the debate and to continue working with the committee on this journey to do our very best for our looked after children. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Jane Baxter, around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As the newest member of the Education and Culture Committee, some might say I had the luxury of considering the final report without having had to undertake the hours of work required for pulling together such a comprehensive review of the current systems and decision-making processes for determining whether to take a child into care. However, on reading the report and the accompanying documents, it seems that I missed out on some very useful evidence sessions at the previous committee meetings. And I was particularly pleased that the committee took the time to meet with children and young people in the care system to make sure that their voices could be heard and their experiences contribute towards the development of the report. And that evidence gathering of the committee in listening to those young people is the most crucial point and underpins one of the themes, hearing all voices in the decision-making processes. Sadly, it is too easy for many young people who are in care to become a statistic, to be written off ahead of their time. When we talk about how we support the most vulnerable young people in our society, we should think about our own family, our friends, our loved ones. If you consider everything that you do for your own family, without a second thought, looked after children deserve no less. They deserve no less commitment, no less patience, and no less presence of a caring adult in their lives. And perhaps as a society, we need to examine our attitude to looked after children and the system that supports them and their families. Why is care perceived as a last resort or a response to family failure? I prefer to think of it as a declaration by society that every child matters and deserves the best, and the system has to deliver that. A child being taken into care does not have to be a last resort. Of course, there should be concentrated support for families to try to improve the underlying issues. But as the convener highlighted, the move towards early interventions of taking children into care sooner can, perhaps counterintuitively, be positive if it ensures that the decision leads to more permanence and stability in that child's life, and thus better outcomes in the form of improved life chances. Sadly, this is still not the case in many circumstances. But again, it is good that these areas for improvement have been picked up and highlighted by the committee's work during this inquiry, and I hope we see some action on them. And because of this room for improvement, I am pleased that we see an increasing emphasis on the need for permanence in a child's life. Much of the evidence the committee considered highlighted that for too many children in care, the difficulties and complexities of decision-making when considering outcomes for children can upset that stability in a child's life, not just at the start of their childhood, but as they move into adulthood too. Because there is no arbitrary cut-off point in a loved one's life when you stop caring about them or they stop needing support. As a mother of 2 grown-up sons in their 30s, I know that only too well. To describe a parent's relationship with their children in the dryly technical language of this sector, it's about establishing a long-term framework of care and love. And development of that long-term framework is what we support when we want to see improvements made to the decision-making processes about taking children into care. The Scottish Government has been keen to highlight how the Children and Young People's Bill goes some way towards meeting the challenges identified in the committee report. One of the measures within that bill, which the Labour Party will be supporting, is the increase in eligibility for aftercare for young people leaving care from 21 to 26. Because the permanence which we seek for children in care is not just about making sure they have a roof over their heads. Stability is not just a house. It's about having a home and friends and feeling valued, not just being accommodated. And one of the challenges of delivering public services is that the system which we have in place in Scotland today is a network of processes and multi-agency approaches that aims to develop a safety net which will catch and seek to protect the most vulnerable children in Scotland. So it's vital, if this is to be successful, and we can't afford for any child to slip through the gaps in our decision-making processes. And whilst we have guidelines for these vital processes, we have heard evidence from a range of organisations expressing the concern that there is still inconsistency across the country in the way in which these guidelines are applied. Bernardo's has highlighted how each local authority has their own assessment process for handling risk assessment on taking children into care, which obviously impacts on the potential outcomes for children depending on where they live. The report does recognise the impact of GIRFIC and other child protection measures, but recognises that current decision-making processes are not always delivering best outcomes for children. We do not want to scrap the system and start again, but we do need to make improvements. Many of the points raised in the committee report, particularly regarding looked after children, are themes covered in the Children and Young People's Bill. And we will be working with Aberlour, Bernardo's and Who Cares to bring forward a number of amendments at stage 2 of the bill to improve the outcomes for looked after children. However, we know, Presiding Officer, that legislation alone is not enough. We need a cultural shift in attitudes towards looked after children, and I look forward to working with colleagues to achieve that.
Thank you. I now call on Liz Smith, around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I put on record the apologies of my colleague Mary Scanlon, who was due to be participating in this debate because of travel situations. She's had to head back to the Highlands for a constituency event rather earlier than she was anticipating, so apologies to you and to the Chamber. I don't think the extent of the challenge which is facing this Parliament, and indeed most especially the Education Committee, has really ever been in doubt. Over the last few years during this inquiry, and indeed the one before it, it has been patently clear that the Scottish care system is letting down far too many young people. And in preparing this report, I think we've heard time and time again from charities, from the third sector organisations, and most importantly from young people inside the care system itself, that most of the concern, by no means all, but most of the concern centres around the decision-making process. And before I return to the report itself and also to the government's response, I want to acknowledge the very real frustration which stretches well beyond Holyrood about the length of time that it's taking to meaningfully address the issue of looked after children. I think all parties in this chamber have shared a common commitment to making the Scottish care system as effective as possible. Yet for all the goodwill and all the endeavour, we seem to be finding ourselves back at first principles time and time again. I think we've been very good at the diagnostic process, but perhaps much less good at finding a cure. For instance, when SCRA published its 211 report, there was real hope that the progress would follow very soon after. But now, 2.5 years on, we are still very much stuck with the same problems. Indeed, the Minister, in her response to the committee report, indicated that the Scottish Government is aware of that situation, intends to review the care and permanence plan with a revised strategy in the early new year, and that's very good to hear, because I think we all recognise the huge sensitivities involved with an issue such as this, but the need to ensure that changes are very well balanced and properly implemented. But likewise, I think we all feel a little guilty that the pace of reform has been too slow. Presiding Officer, I think in the course of our deliberations, we've all been considering why it is that we've made so little progress, given the extent of the goodwill that I spoke about a little earlier. Because we've had very considerable cross-party support, and we've also had the situation where the issue has been placed, and I give credit to the Scottish Government in this respect, it's been placed further up the political agenda. Have we been missing some key points? Have we been failing to listen to the right people? Or perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, are we actually relatively powerless when it comes to dealing with some situations? I think there might be just a little bit of that. Certainly that's what we were very bluntly told by two of the witness panels. But I also think it's because of the weaknesses that are inherent within some of the data, which has been essential in uncovering the problems with the decision-making process. And I also think it's been a result of poor transparency, although I don't think that's been intentional. That said, there is absolutely no weakness or lack of transparency when it comes to the very blunt statistics which define the problem. And yes, some of them are truly shocking. While overall 56% of school leavers gain 5 or more qualifications, it's only 4.7% of children who are looked after away from home and 0.5% of children who are looked after at home can expect the same degree of attainment. That's not a small disparity, that is a gaping chasm, and that, I think, reflects very poorly on all of us. Moreover, when 87.5% of school leavers are engaged in either work or education or training, only half of those who are looked after at home are making that the case, and we are really not doing them any justice whatsoever when it comes to them acquiring the relevant skills to participate in a modern workforce, and something that obviously has lifelong implications. And I think thirdly, during our most recent inquiry, we heard very troubling evidence from the NSPCC that in Glasgow, 2/3 of children who have left care to return home end up back in the system inside a year. Oscillating between pillar and post, Deputy Presiding Officer, these youngsters are at serious risk of being completely left behind. So if we've been very good at the diagnosis, what is the cure? Now, I don't think there is any doubt that much of this will have to focus on the decision-making process, because I think it's very clear now that many of the witnesses are telling us that there remain too many barriers in the way of good decision-making. Barriers which mean that too many children are being left in unsuitable home environments where decision-making is inconsistent and very variable across the country, or a system which doesn't use resources sufficiently well enough, and there are some groups that are finding it far too difficult to have the courage of their convictions to remove the child, and I can well understand why. In response, perhaps the key recommendation surrounds early permanence, the idea that by intervening earlier, children are removed from an unstable home environment and given the foundation that they need to grow and prosper. Indeed, I think a consensus is emerging that together, early intervention and the early permanence, these two things together, can deliver much better outcomes for children, family and the communities. And I think that whole package, if I can call it that, is very important. Of course.
Liam McArthur.
I thank Liz Smith for taking an intervention. She'll recall the debate we had in the committee around early intervention not simply being around early years. And would she share the concern that I think has been expressed that as children get older and in terms of young people, there is sometimes a temptation to put in place temporary measures on the basis that that is a less costly way of dealing with the issues that they face?
Yes, I do, absolutely. And I don't think we could doubt the evidence that was given to us on that point. But I think there is other evidence that is very carefully saying to us that at the earliest stages, where the first signs of difficulties often arise, that we have to do very much more. And I do think it's the combination of that early intervention and the early permanence which the Minister has flagged up. Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm almost out of time, but could I just say that the Scottish Conservatives are largely supportive of the measures that the Scottish Government is taking, I'll come back in my closing remarks to a few issues where I think we could provide a little bit more detail, or where we request of the Scottish Government to provide a little bit more detail. But above all, I think we all have to ask ourselves, why is it that we are still here debating so many of the issues that we were debating not that long ago, because we haven't really managed to resolve them. Thank you.
Many thanks. We now turn to the open debate, and at this stage of the debate I can offer speeches of around 6 minutes with time for interventions. I call George Adam to be followed by Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This debate comes on the back of the extensive inquiry by the Education Committee into decision-making on whether to take young children into care. Some of the issues, as Stewart Maxwell, the convener, quite rightly said, it's very powerful when a young person actually comes up to you, or he's in his 20s at that stage, and says as a witness that he should have been taken into care sooner. You know, he actually said that him and his brother were both in care and he should have been taken into care a lot sooner. And that kind of makes everything that we discussed, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, it brings a reality to the debate and the issues that we're discussing. You know, many of the children's charities engaged during the process, and they mentioned as well that some of the difficulties that are involved in consistency of decision-making, which has already been mentioned by Jane Baxter and others as well, was one of them. The fact that other local authorities kind of have different guidelines in moving things forward. And, you know, Bernardo's in their one actually said one of the inconsistencies that worried them, the example they gave, was Bernardo Scotland's concern that there is not always consistency in the focus given to the rights of the child. We've witnessed some local authorities becoming too optimistic about the outcomes of maintaining the child in the family setting at the expense of the need of the child. And this is one of the things that did come across quite strongly when you spoke to some of the young people as well, because when they explained their experience, they, again, like that young man I was talking about, wanted to actually be taken. When they looked back in retrospect, they agreed at the time they probably wanted to stay with their family, but in retrospect, when they were taken into care, it had made a difference in their life. Now, I'm not saying that's obviously for every child, and I think the Scottish Government's ideal of early intervention and preventative ways of dealing with things is the way forward, because you have to look at some of the things that were said by these young people during that period. And we've already talked about another member, a young person that came in, and it was a brother, and it was a perfect example. Two brothers again. This one was in his mid-20s, and his younger brother was a teenager. Now, when they went through the process, what happened with them was that by the time we saw the two of them, the older brother was actually felt guilty about the fact that he hadn't been there to actually support the family, look after the family, deal with the issue. The younger brother was, to use a local parochialism, had been taken in earlier and obviously younger and to care, and he was actually quite gallous with the whole situation, and it showed you it was such an obvious way if you ever wanted to explain the difference and how to make things work. That was a perfect example of the younger sibling was actually dealt with the situation a lot better because it happened to him a lot quicker, whereas the older sibling had a situation where he actually felt guilty himself and he took it on himself to deal with it. And that's something we want to actually kind of deal with. I welcome the Minister's response and commitment to improve the outcomes of children and young people. And I think we're right when we say getting it right for every child, and the GIRFEC principles that are within the Children and Young People Bill, they can make a difference if we get that right and we use these principles and they're legislated for within the local authority level. That can actually maybe ensure that we get to a situation where that young man doesn't have to feel the way he does when he's talking to people like ourselves. I'm glad he did. I'm glad he was able to open up and actually talk to us about that, because it made it so obvious how he felt and what a difference that made in his life. But one of the other issues that came up was the fact that social work professionals, you know, there was a situation where, it's already been mentioned by others as well, social work professionals were being promoted to a more senior role and taken away from the front line, or they were actually leaving to go into other less frontline roles, working for some of the children's charities and various other projects, still doing good work, but their expertise getting taken away from the frontline job. We really need people of their experience to get involved. And I think the Scottish Government and local authorities have to work together to ensure that we can actually retain that staff, because we can't afford to lose that expertise. You know, in my days in the motor industry, we used to talk about you never promote your best salesman or salesperson. You always ensure that they're out there doing the job, and it should be almost the same. We must have a way that social workers can stay, that are good in that profession, stay in the front line and do the good work that they have got, they do out there, and to ensure that we can give them the support that they need for that as well. So the other thing that the Scottish Government, I mentioned earlier on about the early intervention and prevention, and for me this is an important part of the Children and Young People's Bill that comes out, is the fact that there is scope there for early intervention and preventative to solve some of the problems. You know, I mentioned last week's debate that I was in the Pullman Young Offenders Institute to see a Bernardo's project, Outside In project, which had made a big difference to these young people when they were there, but many of them were there because of either broken homes, they were in care, there was a violent situation inevitably happened at one point. And when we started talking about things and started to discuss their issues, they actually believed that if possibly the Children and Young People's Bill, with some of the things that I said to them, could have made a difference, not to every child, but to some of the young people that were in that situation. And I think that's the way we have to go, because that's the way we have to ensure that all the young people, if we're going to get it right for every child in Scotland, is the best place in the world for children to grow up, then we have to make sure that everyone gets that opportunity and everyone gets, regardless of their own background. So I think I agree with Jane Baxter when she actually said there has to be a change of national attitude when it comes to looked after children as well, because we have to get away from this idea that there are other people's problems. You know, it's almost like the corporate parenting thing again. We have to talk about that we are the ones that have got to take on the responsibility as well. And we must also think differently. You know, we have to make sure that the government needs to work in partnership with local authorities and find solutions to the problems and the challenges that we face. So in closing, Presiding Officer, I'll just say, you know, I welcome a lot of the work that we've done. And one of the things that I really liked about the fact the committee was meeting the young people that have gone through the system and making it real and seen and listen to their evidence. So hopefully we listen to that, we move things forward and we can make things better for children in Scotland.
Many thanks. I now call Ken McIntosh to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by thanking the committee for taking on this challenging and contentious subject and for producing such a thoughtful and, I hope, helpful report. And given the broad consensus across the Parliament and across all sectors about the importance of early intervention generally in improving the prospects for our children, I am struck by the lack of agreement around the whole question of when to take a child into care. There was one particularly insightful comment in the report from Professor Eileen Munro, which sums up the dilemma that faces us. And she said, society varies in the message that it sends. There are times when it says that a child should never be left in any danger, but it gets into a paddy when a lot of children are taken away. It's always a pendulum that we are trying not to let to swing too far in either direction. Now, I certainly don't want the pendulum to swing wildly, but I do believe we should tip it in the right direction. I do believe there is still a need to be intervening more timorously, not so much because it will prevent cases of abuse, although we always have to be watchful for that kind of deliberate and wicked cruelty, but so as to prevent the grinding and depressing prolonged neglect and the damage that causes that is so much more common. I'm not going to pretend to bring any sort of expertise to this matter when the committee has clearly benefited from the evidence of so many caring and experienced professionals, but I would observe that nearly all the cases that have come to my attention, directly or indirectly, from constituents or other sources, and which have left me worried, have all pointed to the need for speedier decision-making. In its interim report, the committee asked, are too many children left too long with parents who neglect or emotionally abuse them? And the simple answer to that question is yes, they are. What is not so simple, as the committee has made clear, is what we can then do about it. It's encouraging to read, for example, about the strong public policy focus on achieving permanence for children more quickly. What is not so encouraging is to read that early intervention is more likely to reflect the resources available to frontline social workers than the variations in need that might exist or the demand from families. In fact, it always troubles me to see how often the decisions around... Mr McArthur.
Liam McArthur.
Grateful to Mr McIntosh for giving way. In terms of early intervention, one of the other things that we heard, it's not just about intervening with a view to taking the child away. It's arriving at a decision in the best interest of the child, and that can be about maintaining the child in the family home. But what we also heard is that at that point we need to have the support put in place in order to ensure that that home environment is as stable and as supportive as it can be. And too often those resources almost are being withdrawn at that stage rather than added to.
Ken McIntosh.
I entirely agree with Mr McArthur, and although I was highlighting at this stage the acute need, I will return to that point and the need for support, for quick support, early intervention, but speedier decision-making in making that support available for families. But to return to the issue about resources and the way they shape our actions, it troubles me to see how often the decisions around children in need of care reflect the facilities or options open to the public authorities rather than the needs of the children themselves. Now, I'd welcome the Minister's comments on the extent to which this is still happening. But, for example, it still seems to be the case that public authorities with access to residential care homes, for example, are more likely to place children in residential care than those who do not have that option on their doorstep. Now, many of us will have heard the adverts, which seem to be more frequent in recent weeks and months, asking for foster and adoptive families to come forward. Although, on the one hand, that possibly highlights a shortage of such families, I take the emphasis on recruitment as a very positive sign. Again, though, what is rather worrying is the experience of those families, particularly of those looking to adopt. Those of us who have dealt with fostering or adoption cases will know that in the vast majority of cases, the children up for adoption have a range of needs and challenges. Even when children as young as 2 or 3 are taken into care, the damage that has been caused by poor attachment in infancy can often play out in behaviours in the child's teens or later years. There is so much evidence now to reveal the importance of the first few months, let alone the first few years of a child's life. Yet our systems for helping families in need seem incredibly slow and cumbersome. I have cited examples from my own constituency previously, where the authorities have indicated their intentions to remove a child from his or her parent and have lined up an adoptive family, but the whole process has taken not months, but years. In that time, what damage has been done? Removing a child from his or her family is not something to be done in haste, but neither does it help anyone to drag these decisions out. So what can we do? I think we all recognise how difficult it is to know exactly when and how far to intervene. We don't want to design our policy around the worst examples, but surely we can agree that quicker decision-making is more likely to produce more effective results. Families need to be more actively supported, the point that Ms McArthur made earlier. Offered help to become good parents, not just inspected every now and then to see if things are all right. It's all too easy for the fly and the sly to deceive the health visitor or the social worker. But these families are rarely evil, just incapable. Where possible, we need to help them look after their own children properly. Now, putting the child at the centre of our thinking is what GERFEC, Getting It Right for Every Child, is all about, and it is a good approach. And I would emphasise that there are aspects of the Children and Young People's Bill which are to be warmly welcomed. I would echo the point highlighted by Jane Baxter earlier about the extension of rights to young adults leaving care to ask for support. But I have already expressed my doubts about the named person approach taken in the bill, which could divert resources away from where they are most needed. I am not convinced that legislation by itself will do much good if we strip local authorities of the resources needed to provide the support. Is there not a bit of an irony, or at least a contrast, between our shared agreement across this Parliament on the committee's report, while simultaneously knowing that social workers are so hard-pressed, so stressed with their caseload, that they scarcely have the time to make the visits or to have the room to make the balanced judgments we all seek. In fact, I think we should acknowledge that those working in child protection get mixed messages. The reaction to those shocking cases of child abuse is often to point the finger of blame at social workers and then to respond with many very well-intentioned recommendations. But the net effect sometimes is to encourage those working in the sector to become ever more risk-averse. They become more aware of the need to protect themselves from prosecution rather than solely concentrate on protecting children from harm. And there was a very good article in the Scotsman recently, in fact, by Stewart Maxwell, a very thought-provoking article, which argued that the bureaucratisation of the adult-child relationship has undermined our ability to exercise personal judgment. Now, I believe the answer does not lie in ever more formal procedures. It doesn't lie in processes, whether they be clumsy or streamlined, but in creating an atmosphere where good judgment is at the centre of decision-making, where social workers and other carers are encouraged to step in to support, not to condemn, where good examples are heralded and lauded rather than simply bad examples pilloried. We know we can never get it absolutely right, that there will always be examples which shame us all for their human cruelty. But if this report can tip the balance towards helping those children, intervening earlier and quicker to help parents and, where needed, to remove children, then it will have been very worthwhile.
Many thanks. And as members will be aware, there's quite a bit of time in hand which will allow for interventions, the development of themes and even ideas. I now call on Claire Adamson to be followed by Liam McArthur. A generous 6 minutes.
Presiding Officer, thank you for that challenge at the start of my speech. Could I first begin by associating myself with the comments of Stewart Maxwell about those witnesses and contributors that have worked with the committee in the past few months in coming to the conclusions that we have in this report. And I listened to Liz Smith talking about her frustration in all this area, but I'm also very aware that we have done quite a considerable amount of work across this chamber in the areas around these issues. And indeed, in December last year, we had a debate on permanence and adoption in this chamber. And at that time, Gil Patterson, who spoke, said it was one of those debates that shows the Parliament in its best light. And I think that this report also has the potential to meet that standard. Yes,
Liz Smith.
I thank her for doing so. You do point to the frustration that I feel. That is absolutely accurate. I don't deny that we have come some way to addressing the problem, but one of the most stark pieces of evidence that was provided to us was when somebody told us in fairly blunt terms that we were right back where we had been several years ago, and those of us who were around at the previous time. I think the frustration is the fact that the progress that we have made is really rather piecemeal, and it's not going fast enough to address the very real problems that I think Ken McIntosh has just been speaking about, to have the courage of our convictions in some circumstances. Would you acknowledge that that's actually part of the frustration?
Claire Adamson?
Yes, absolutely. And I do have the same experience from listening to the comments that were there. But I think we also have to recognise that the committee has, in our initial inquiry, identified that we were really letting down our looked after children, and I think the fact that we took forward this second inquiry in this particular area is a new piece of work, and something that maybe hasn't given the prominence, certainly in this place, to some of the issues and some of the problems that have been existing before. I'd also like to thank Jane Baxter as a new member of our committee in recognising the very hard works of our colleagues on our own benches and across the Parliament in bringing together this piece of work that we're discussing this afternoon, because I do, and that's why I'm so pleased to be able to speak to it this afternoon. When we discussed permanence last year, my colleague Willie Coffey actually spoke about the scale of the problem that we have, and I think it might be worth just repeating some of the facts that he raised at that time, that there are up to 16,000 children who are being looked after in Scotland's local authority, and possibly up to about another 15,000 who are being cared for by relatives under informal arrangements. And so the importance of the Scottish Government in working with local authorities and other partner organisations with families in this area is so vitally important. And in December last year, I highlighted a report that Who Cares Scotland have contributed a great deal to the report that's before the Parliament today, both in their support of young people who wanted to give evidence to the committee, but also in their own briefings. They conducted a survey of young people last year. They spoke to 116 young people about their experience as care leavers in the system, and the quote I want to highlight in particular was from a young woman who said, "It was all too quick. I never got the time to pack my things. I would have liked to have more time to prepare, and also to have been told that going into care was an option, as it was all a shock to me when it happened. I never got to say goodbye to my friends either, which I didn't like." And I think that quote sums up a lot of the concerns that were raised by very many of the young people that we spoke to in the course of our deliberations. On that basis, I'd like to talk briefly to the 4 themes that are in the report, to the early intervention theme, and we've made quite a bit of progress towards early intervention with the rollout of GIRFEC across Scotland, and also the fact that that's going to be put into statute in the bill, in the Children and Young People's Bill. And I think that this is going some way to improve what we mean by early intervention. Ken McIntosh also talked about the challenges for social work, and I don't think we can underestimate that in the theme number 2, in the assessments, there is a huge amount of pressure to get it right for social workers, to ensure that assessments are at a standard that is acceptable and to decision makers about young people. GIRFEC again has gone some way to improve interagency and interdepartmental cooperation and to improve confidence that assessments meet requirements. But this report also asks the government to consider the concerns that have been raised and the commitment to GIRFEC that a clear timescale should be given that will demonstrate that integration is working and that we have improved confidence in the decision-making process and assessments. And I think we can't underestimate how important the establishment of CELSIS has in contributing to the improved confidence in assessments. CELSIS was set up with an aim to promote effective professional engagement with families, promote the planning for and management of high-quality assessments, and reduce unnecessary delays and improvement in performance and planning to promote a new whole-system approach to performance planning. And also the creation, again in 2012, of the Early Years Collaborative, which is looking at evidence-based decision-making. So I think these two coming together has the potential to do transformational work in this area. But the challenge for the government and for local authorities is to ensure that the sharing of the findings and the adoption of best practices and the benefits of the research from CELSIS and the Early Years Collaborative can be used to maximum effect across Scotland. Mr McIntosh has already mentioned the importance of training and assessment in these areas, and we cannot underestimate the concerns that have been raised by social workers about the demographic challenges in the profession and the claim that there was a disappearance of post-qualification training and career development. And I think the report in paragraph 63 asks the government to address and take very seriously the concerns that were raised in this area. And if I could close finally, I think I used a quote from a young person from Who Cares Scotland, and I think that quote in itself says all we have to know about hearing all the voices in the decision-making process, which is theme number 4 in the report. And I think that there's a lot of good work going on out there. There's a lot of progress being made, and I'm really glad that this report will play a small part in improving the lives of our looked-after children.
Many thanks. Now call on Liam McArthur, to be followed by Colin Beattie, a generous 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. The issue of looked after children and young people, how we improve the life experience and outcomes for this group has dominated the work of the committee in this session of the Parliament. None of the committee members, either past or present, would make any apology for that focus or the time we've committed to getting into the detail of the issues involved. These are complex, and as I think is reflected in this latest report, it is not an area that lends itself to neat, far less easy solutions. I would like to add my thanks, however, to all those who gave evidence and who helped in the development of this report, and indeed the one that preceded it on improving the outcomes for looked after children. One inquiry did, I think, flow naturally from the other, though even now I have the sense that we have scarcely done justice to many of the issues. It is inevitable, I think, as the convener indicated, that we and certainly successor committees will return to this subject again in the future. The approach to this report was rather different, as the convener explained, with interim findings and a parliamentary debate, as well as a special hearing involving the wide range of stakeholders involved, whose work in this field on a day-in, daily basis deserves our respect and our gratitude. Above all, though, we were committed to hearing the voices of those children and young people with direct experience of the care system. Their testimony was particularly powerful, at times highly creative, and I think we owe a special debt to Who Cares Scotland for their help throughout this inquiry, not least in the session with those with that direct experience. As well as being moved by the piece of theatre they performed, I was struck by what those young people had to say.
They wanted to feel involved in the decisions that profoundly affect their lives. They wanted a sense of belonging, not to be shunted from pillar to post. And most of all, they wanted a strong, stable, supportive and loving environment in which to be brought up. As Jane Baxter rightly said, these are all things we would expect for our own children, all things we should aspire to deliver for those for whom we have responsibility as corporate parents. I think the committee's report is helpful in that regard. I also believe that the Children and Young People's Bill currently before the committee has the potential to deliver real improvements for those in care and those leaving care. I will turn to these shortly, but want to reflect briefly on the Government's response to the committee's report, which I confess left me in places a little frustrated. It is, of course, generally very positive, and I absolutely agree with the Minister's view that the focus must be on early intervention, particularly in the early years, but also on early permanence. Nevertheless, I felt too often the message was either we're doing this already or this is nothing to do with us. And that may be unfair. It may, to be frank, reflect the iterative nature of two committee inquiries where we've been in almost constant dialogue with the Scottish Government. But it still felt, in some places, a bit unsatisfactory. For example, the Minister's letter to the convener starts by declaring, and I quote, encouraging signs that outcomes are improving gradually across almost all indicators. I agree the picture is not universally bleak, but this statement seems unduly upbeat. The committee found little evidence, for example, that outcomes for those looked after at home are anything other than shockingly poor, as the convener suggested in terms of education, health, homelessness, or involvement in the criminal justice system. Later in the response, the Minister talks of her programme of work to encourage strategic commissioning, which is indeed very, very welcome. But again, on the evidence we receive from those involved in the third sector, it is a way of happening in almost all parts of the country. Likewise, the committee's concerns about workforce training and retention within social work appear to have been rather brushed aside. I'm not suggesting that no action has been taken by the Minister in conjunction with local authorities, far, far from it, or indeed that there are any easy answers. However, we did hear firm evidence that retaining staff in what can often be highly stressful roles within children and family social work is a problem in many areas. As I think George Adam indicated, we also heard that retaining experienced social workers on the front line was a particular challenge. A concern, obviously, as providing high-quality assessment of difficult cases depends more on experience than perhaps on training. That said, I do recognise the steps the Government has taken and is taking. Indeed, I welcome the establishment of the Permanence Leaders Group. I also acknowledge the opportunity presented by the Children's Bill to make further progress, for which there is solid cross-party commitment. So where can this progress be made? According to Bernardo's, improving outcomes requires improvement in the consistency, speed and timeliness of decision-making. And once a decision is made to take a child into care, an absolute focus on securing permanency. This was entirely borne out by our own inquiry. In terms of consistency, Bernardo's highlight the different risk assessment processes used by authorities in Scotland, and the uncertainty about evidence, what evidence needs to be gathered, does lead to needless delays, as such a common framework across the country is, I think, necessary. Speed of decision-making is also crucial, notwithstanding that these decisions are probably amongst the most difficult that any authority or any individual in authority has to make. It's not, of course, as the Minister acknowledges, just about speed, but about achieving permanence quickly. Bernardo's proposed a 6-month timeframe for conducting a parental assessment, but also, as highlighted as Ken McIntosh did, the need for much stronger support for parents where a decision is taken to leave or to return a child to the family home. And often the reverse appears to happen at present, a complaint particularly from parents of children with disabilities or additional support needs, though hopefully proposals in the bill for a named person and single child's plan will help in this respect. And also early decision-making is vital. As Stewart Maxwell said, the complaint from many of the young people we spoke to was that they were left in a poor home environment for far too long. The earlier decisions are made at whatever age, the better the outcomes for the child or young person. Certainly would. Yeah.
Stewart Maxwell.
I've been listening to the speech very carefully, and I agree with what the member is saying. Does the member share my concern about the decision-making process, which leads to one child being removed from the home, but a younger sibling being left in the home, effectively both suffering the same abuse? We heard much evidence about this particular situation. It's certainly something that has left a rather permanent memory in my brain about the fact that we're leaving children in the home when evidence of abuse has been proved.
McArthur.
I think the convener is absolutely right in that point. It was one of the most striking aspects of the evidence that we received, that almost it seemed to be an exercise in going back to first principles rather than basing an assessment on the existing risks that seemed to be well known and well understood. Deputy Presiding Officer, as I said earlier, the Children and Young People's Bill can help address a number of the issues flagged up in the committee's report. In addition, I welcome moves in the bill to improve aftercare for those leaving the care system, though the eligibility criteria, I think, must be extended and a greater consistency in what is provided are also required. I will lodge amendments at stage 2 to that effect. Moreover, with the announcement yesterday by the UK Government that children in care in England will have a legal right to stay with their foster families until their 21st birthday, I would welcome comments from the Minister on what steps might be taken here in Scotland. In conclusion, I'm grateful to all those who helped in the production of this report and hope, not least through the bill now before the committee, that we can make further inroads into improving the life chances of those who go through the care system in this country. In that respect, I hope ministers, in quite legitimately defending their record, will guard against any temptation to downplay the serious gaps that still exist, the slow pace of improvement, or the distance we still need to travel to achieve our shared ambition to make sure that for our looked after children and young people, Scotland really is the best place in the world to grow up. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Colin Beattie to be followed by Fiona MacLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I believe that this inquiry has in some respects been a difficult one for the Education Committee. I, for one, hope that somewhere among the wealth of information and evidence provided, some sort of magic bullet would be found which would point to a clear and simple solution. But alas, that's not the case. What is clear is that successive governments have rightly placed a high priority on children in care. Considerable resources have been channelled into this area. A multitude of groups and organisations have come into being over the years with the laudable aim of providing much-needed support. Yet the fact is that improvement has been glacial. I believe that the bill before Parliament will make real progress and create a more consistent approach. It should help to create the environment within which solutions can flourish. It helps point the way in a more cohesive and focused manner. It's not a magic bullet, but in my opinion moves us in the right direction. Solutions at the end of the day still lie with people and how they respond to the opportunities created by the bill. The Education and Culture Committee's report highlights many of the key issues surrounding the decision-making process. From an organisational perspective, the evidence points to the fact that at present no joined-up approach is in place across Scotland, and therefore there are major inconsistencies across the board. Decisions are made through a mixture of processes involving a wide range of stakeholders, from social workers to courts to children's hearing systems. Beyond this, each local authority has its own individual assessment process to handle risk assessment when deciding whether to take a child into care. When all these factors come into play, it may well be the case that what should be the true focus of the decision, the welfare of the child in question, is effectively put to one side. There has to be clarity that when making these decisions, the rights of the children and parents are carefully balanced within this. It should also at no point be underestimated that this decision-making process is potentially the most difficult that local authorities have to make, and I believe that the committee has been sensitive to this fact. Many competing viewpoints have to be taken into consideration. A potentially wrong decision may result in further neglect, abuse or worse. In order to improve this process, a case could be made that earlier intervention would provide the potential for stability or permanence to be put in effect as early as possible, so that the potential for harm is minimised. And many of the young people who had experienced the care system and who spoke to the committee indicated that they felt they should have been taken into care earlier. However, it's not always been proven that early intervention will produce the desired outcome for each family, especially given circumstances which will almost certainly differ from case to case. One size doesn't fit all. Fundamentally, early intervention should be placed in the context of whether it will lead to fewer children being placed in care over the longer term, and whether these children will enjoy better outcomes as a result. In pre-birth cases, it must be considered whether providing parenting support would provide a positive outcome. If early intervention is introduced in tandem with early permanence, as the Scottish Government proposes, we should see fewer young people remaining in long-term care. The role of social workers and the support given to them are factors that need to be carefully examined. The evidence supplied to the committee indicates that at present, social workers lack confidence in their own knowledge and assessment skills. It has also been suggested that they take an overly optimistic approach, which can result in an unwillingness to remove children from potentially harmful or neglectful situations. Beyond that, their evidence in court is, we are told, not treated with the same legitimacy as evidence from other professions such as doctors and psychologists. If a lack of credibility is given to the opinions of social workers, it's no surprise the profession suffers from a lack of confidence. This could be remedied in the training given to social workers. The social work degree could be expanded to allow for more specialisation than at present, and post-qualification training and career development could be more focused and targeted. I understand that the Scottish Social Services Council is reviewing the degree, and I look forward to seeing their conclusions. This also leads on to the provision in the bill for the named person for those in care, and the response to this has been overwhelmingly positive, though still one or two questions do remain. For example, if the named person is assumed to be a teacher, it is assumed that add-on costs will be minimal. What will happen during the school holidays? Now, these decisions are really in the hands of the local councils, but the Children and Young Persons Bill does indicate the Scottish Government is taking the lead to implement solutions. It's also important not to forget parents with learning disabilities. International research suggests that 2 out of every 5 children born to parents with learning disabilities are permanently removed from their care. While this statistic may not refer specifically to Scotland, it is unlikely to be significantly different here, and therefore these cases need to be considered very carefully. There is some evidence that prejudicial attitudes, for example, that people with learning disabilities are incompetent, have been the reason for removal of children. But I would like to think a modern independent Scotland is capable of much more compassion and understanding than this. To this end, the Scottish Government set up the Child Protection and Disabilities Ministerial Working Group, which will consider the needs of children and young people in families where disability affects a parent, and will presumably also study the level of support that such parents or carers require. One key issue is that the voices of children and parents are heard throughout the decision-making process. And the committee met with young people who had recently come out of the care system, and their feedback was exceptionally enlightening and thought-provoking. Indeed, it provided us with a uniquely different perspective on the situation. In the context of the children's hearing system, the reactions we were given indicated several shortcomings with the current setup. It was highlighted to the committee that the hearings can be intimidating with too many people present, including professionals such as psychologists who could provide an opinion but had not necessarily seen the children on a regular basis. Added to this is the concern that some children were unaware that they could speak to the panel on their own and were reluctant to speak out in front of their family. It's not surprising that the better experiences young people had at these hearings were the ones with fewer people and where they genuinely felt these responsibilities were listened to them. And this truly is the crux of the issue for children being taken into care. Throughout the whole process, they need to be listened to, and their feedback needs to be properly considered in order to ensure that when making decisions on taking children into care, the voices of those affected most are those that are given highest priority. The newly established Children's Hearing Improvement Partnership will hopefully take this feedback on board to improve the process. In conclusion, the Scottish Government is working to strike a balance in permanence decisions, and while results may not be immediate, and while we rely on the responses of other individuals and organisations, I believe we will have a bill that results in a much more considerate and empathetic care system for children taken into care.
Many thanks. I now call on Fiona MacLeod to be followed by Neil Fernell. A generous 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to speak in this debate with little expertise on this subject, but with a great interest in it. And that interest stems, I think, partly from my years as the chair of East Bartonshire Children's Panel Advisory Committee. But I wonder, with Ken McIntosh and I again being in a children's debate, if there's maybe an umbilical cord taking us back to that very first Education and Children's Committee in 1999 that we just can't quite leave alone. I'd like to look at three areas in my speech today, looking at early intervention, prevention and particularly the named person in the Children and Young People's Bill. I'd also like to look at how the voice of the child is heard in all this process. And with the background that I've just explained to the Chamber, I'd also like to look at the role of the children's hearings in this whole process. But flowing through everything that I've read, I think it's about planning for permanence and about elimination of what I understand is now being called drift in looked after young people. And I noticed that that was also a theme that flowed through the Minister's opening remarks, which I thought was important. And for me, a lot of my contribution today is based on recent reading, recent research, and I found the committee's inquiry, but all the information that went behind your report, so useful and so important. And for me, as runs through that report and as ran through the Minister's opening remarks, is the fact that GIRFEC is the foundation to everything that we should do in this area. So if I turn to intervention, there's much evidence that early intervention and the preventative agenda is actually what is best for young people, not just young people, but for their families as well. When I was on the Health Committee, I remember the Chief Medical Officer coming to us and telling us that, in his view now, it's the 9 months before birth and the 9 months after birth that actually set the foundation for a person's life. And I think that is very clear in what we're talking about here. But when looking for evidence for this speech, I found there was quite a lot of specific evidence on how the early intervention agenda is very important when taking children into care. And it was really, for someone like me that likes to find the evidence there, it was really very comforting at an intellectual level to find all the work that the Scottish Government is putting into supporting teams that are actually doing the research so that there will be a strong evidence base for all decisions that were made. So to find the existence of the Permanence and Care team, I know that Claire Adamson talked about CELSIS, the Centre for Excellence for Looked After Children in Scotland, founded in 2011 at Strathclyde University, I think is so important as we take this debate forward, so that when decisions are made either legislatively or by a social worker down there on the ground, it is decisions made on evidence. And I think for me that's where the named person in the Children and Young People's Bill is so important in this process, because my understanding of the named person, it will allow for integration across the child's life. It will ensure that there's consistency and coordination of help and support for every child in Scotland. And Colin Beattie, in his speech, listed the multi-agency involvement in vulnerable young children's lives. And for me, I think that makes the named person, especially for a vulnerable young person, so important. And for someone who's not quite, is not at the heart of the debate, I say absolutely genuinely, I don't understand when Ken McIntosh and the Labour Party say that they have reservations about the named person, because for me it looks that it's absolutely crucial. It will be so supportive for every child in Scotland to have a named person, but it will be absolutely vital for vulnerable young people and their families. I will take an intervention, but I probably won't understand it all, Ken McIntosh.
No, it's simply just to ask, why would it be helpful for my 6 children to have a named person?
Because we never, because I would say as a parent like yourself, Ken, we never know when we might find ourselves as a vulnerable family. We never know when our child might. I do my best as a parent, my absolute best, but that's never to say that I won't, that it wouldn't be helpful for me and my now adult son to have had someone we could turn to. I know we've got plenty of time, Mr McIntosh, but I think we could end up just having a debate across the chamber.
That's fine. Ken McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Fiona MacLeod. I just point out that should there be difficulties in my family, there is an enormous support network. Now, I recognise I'm fortunate, but I have a mother, a brother, 2 sisters, all with kids. My sister, my wife has two siblings with families. her own parents are alive. We've got family, friends, we've got neighbours that would help look after us, all sorts of people who would intervene and support us and recognise if we got into difficulty. The last person, absolutely the last person on that list that we should ever turn to would be a social worker. Now, why? I'm sorry. It is the last person you should turn to. And I think that to go to a social worker in that situation is a total diversion of resources when there are so many people needing urgent help right now.
Fiona MacLeod.
Presiding Officer, I know you're being generous, and I do hope that was a 1.5-minute intervention. I made the comments I made, and I said it, that it was absolutely genuine. I don't understand. I responded to you. As a parent, I did my best. I've got my support networks. But as a parent, I registered my child with a general practitioner, not when he was ill, but so that he had a general practitioner to take him to if he became ill. A named person for me would have been exactly the same support that I could have had, a resource that I could have had if my own family network hadn't allowed it. But as I said, I think the named person will be a fantastic advantage for every child and family in Scotland, but is an absolute necessity for vulnerable children and vulnerable families, given the multi-agency involvement that Colin Beattie said to us. And one of the interesting things when I was doing the research for this speech is that it's not just that there's evidence for the need for a named person, but there's almost universal support for it. I mean, 72% of the respondents to the consultation on the Children and Young People's Bill supported having a named person. When children first surveyed kinship carers, 90% of those responded saying that every child in Scotland should have a named person. 78% of the kinship carers reflected on their own situation, said that they thought if they'd had a named person, it would have been helpful for them and their family. So the support is there, as well as the evidence. Presiding Officer, very quickly, I'm a great fan of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 12. I used to have the T-shirt. So it's all about the child's voice in this whole process must be heard. And I thought it was interesting, some of the evidence that Who Cares gave to the committee. And Who Cares Scotland is just, an organisation that at an organisational level is so good and so supportive. But the young people that you meet through them just blow you away, given their histories that they tell you. But if I can quote from the evidence that Who Cares Scotland gave to the committee, young people should be better informed and included in the decision-making process before, during and after leaving care. And that's where I would have liked to have concentrated on the children's hearing system at this stage. So with your indulgence, Presiding Officer, when I was in the children's hearing, I used to hear so much that the child's presence would be dispensed with. And that's, for me, the heart of Article 12 is that is where the child's voice has to be heard. And it has been lovely for me to go and find all the work that has been done recently. The Scottish Children's Reporters Administration in 2009 setting up participation in hearing group. In 2010, the Children's Hearings Improvement Partnerships being set up, Children's Parliament being involved, and coming across this fantastic document, Hearing Scotland's Children, and also being able to read about the changes that have happened in the hearing system, in things like waiting rooms, in things like the format of the information that comes out to young people. All these sort of things have been really useful for me to learn. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, what I have learned in researching for this debate today is that this is a work in progress, that the intent is there by, to me, it looks like all parties, and that I hope that we will all keep on the path in ensuring that what we do is get it right for every child in Scotland. Thank you.
Many thanks. Excellent. Now call on Neil Findlay to be followed by John McAlpine.
Presiding Officer, do we still have plenty of time in hand on this? I know you were encouraging us.
Mr. Findlay.
I know you were encouraging us to develop ideas, and I hope I don't misrepresent Claire Adamson here, because I would never dream of doing that. But I think when she referred to earlier debate, she said that this Parliament was at its best when discussing, I think it was permanency orders. I don't know if I'm right in that. Was the inference in that was that because Parliament came to a consensual agreement on that issue? Was that what was inferred from that? I think it was. I think she inferred that because Parliament came to a consensus, that was Parliament at its best. I would actually argue that this Parliament sometimes at its best when there is no consensus and we're really debating some big ideas and some big topics. This has nothing to do with this debate. It's just a comment to help the presiding officer. Anyway, into this debate, it's absolutely vital that this report on the subject of young people in care and their future. The committee is correct to observe how few issues are of greater importance in improving the outcomes for our most disadvantaged children. First of all, let me start by thanking the committee. I was a member of the committee for almost all of the inquiry. The report asks some very searching and legitimate questions of not just the Scottish Government but of our society as a whole. And I think at the beginning we should be, I would like to be very candid, because when we consider the outcomes for looked after children, I believe only one conclusion can be reached, and that is that we have and are failing looked after children and failing them very badly indeed, despite in some cases the heroic efforts of frontline staff and the resilience of the young people themselves. There are various measures to evidence that failure, and Liz Smith gave the stark educational attainment figures for looked after children. If you look at the 13th prisoner survey into looked after children that was published in 2011, it shows that 28% of all respondents, that is prisoners in Scottish jails, had been in care at some point. 20% had been in care at the age of 16. 38% of young offenders had been in care as a child, and 26% at the age of 16. 37% of female prisoners had been in care as a child, and 28% at the age of 16. Yet, Presiding Officer, only 2% of all children in Scotland are in care at any given time. The same survey found that 82% of prisoners who were previously in care were using drugs in the 12 months before coming into prison, compared with 60% who had not been in care, and 33% prescribed methadone, compared to 19% who had not been in care. And prisoners who had been in care also had greater problems with reading, writing, numbers, and a range of other differentials exist between the population. These figures and many other sets of statistics represent our collective failure of young people in care. The committee acknowledges these failures, but it also underlines the need for sufficient resources to be provided to ensure that those in care and who are most disadvantaged get the best and most effective support and help available. And I think if we genuinely believe that how we are judged as a society depends on the support we provide to our weakest and most vulnerable people, then it will be the actions that follow this report that will test that, what is sometimes a cliche, to the full. One of the main issues examined was around the decision to remove children from their home and into care, as many people have mentioned. And removing a child, of course, should always be based on what is best for that child. Will the child be better protected, cared for, nurtured and given the opportunity to develop well through either remaining with or by being removed from their family? And some of the young people we met very powerfully argued that they should have been removed much earlier from their family. Others suggested that leaving the young person with their family was the better option. I think one thing that became absolutely clear through the report is that each case has to be considered individually. But what was clear is that the young person and their rights has to be at the centre of any decision making. I think the view that removing children as a last resort is something that we can now put to bed. That is simply wrong. The committee heard how young people and their families who remain at home need much more intensive family support than they appear to get at present, and this requires resources. Unison, representing many of the frontline staff, told the committee our members are reporting more and more cases involving mental health issues. We're taking some children into care in cases where, if proper services had been around and if their parents had received the mental health support in the community that was required, they should not have needed to come into care. The same is also true of young people who are removed from the family home. These are people who have often experienced real trauma in their relatively short lives and who need help to move on in lives where they have often been badly let down by adults, and that can be for a range of reasons. It may be addiction, abuse, crime, illness, homelessness, or a parent being in prison. Too often these young people are moved from placement to placement, separated from siblings or back and forth from home to placement, more often than not without the adequate support and tailored care, counselling, psychological or emotional support that they need, tailored to suit their needs. And the care that they do receive often finishes way too early in their lives. And for those who have come through the care system positively, and they are the exception, they often point to a key individual who they trusted, who cared for them, who respected them and treated them with dignity. This is, I believe, fundamental to a successful young life for any child, but especially for those who need to be cared for outside their natural family. Presiding Officer, the committee, I think, took a bit of convincing to take evidence from young people themselves. I'm glad they did. Their evidence and their experiences was the most powerful evidence. Certainly.
Adamson. I think I wouldn't want to misrepresent Mr Finlay any more than we would want to misrepresent me. My understanding was the committee were very concerned about the public record and the impact that that might have on the young people. It was not that we didn't want to hear their voices, and they were given plenty of opportunities to do that. It was about the public record aspect of that and how that might have been interpreted by some areas of the media, and that's where our concern was. It was for these young people.
Neil Finlay.
I think that was the position we eventually came to, but my view was that at the beginning of that there was some reluctance. And I'm not trying to do down the committee. I think the committee has done a fantastic job, but I think that just reflects the reality of the discussions that we had at that time. Well, we can disagree on that then. Their evidence and their experiences was the most powerful evidence the committee took. And if this report lies on a shelf and effective action is not taken, then I hope that they will hold every member of this Parliament to account for our collective failure. Presiding Officer, these issues are not unique to Scotland. Countries across Europe are wrestling with these types of challenges, but we have a duty to do as much as we possibly can.
Thanks. Excellent. Right, now call on Joan McAlpine, after which we'll move to closing speeches. A generous 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just to address the point that Mr Finlay's just made, as a member of the committee from the outset of this parliamentary session, I've always been very clear that I wanted to hear young people's voices in both the inquiries that we had in young people in care. Teenagers in a roundtable session organised by Who Cares gave harrowing accounts of their life, and as my colleague Claire Adamson says, they were given a good amount of time to do that. That session was not held in public, as it was felt quite rightly, in my view, that we have a duty of care towards these young people, and we should not expose them to media scrutiny, as many were already traumatised by a lifetime of abuse and neglect. The young people who came to see us first staged a short play about the experience of being in care, or as we are now calling it, being looked after. It was a very physical piece of drama with little dialogue, but it spoke volumes. The young protagonist was pushed between the adults who were supposed to care for him and constantly rejected. And the more he was rejected, the worse his behaviour became. He was uncommunicative, angry and silently aggressive. So when an adult did offer help, the boy rejected them. He mirrored the rejection that he'd had to deal with all his life. As a result of his challenging behaviour caused by emotional damage, he was, of course, rejected by adults even more. Afterwards, what alarmed me about the children's experiences of care was that these teenagers had in fact been identified as in need of protection very early in their lives. Many of them had been taken into care before the age of 5, yet despite this, none have achieved permanent placement, and most had multiple placements and experiences of foster family rejection and breakdown. Their life experience certainly vindicated the central purpose of our inquiry. Many of the young people said that they would have gained more stability and permanence in a small residential unit in their teenage years, and I certainly was impressed with the residential unit that we visited in Glasgow. Albeit that the teenagers or young people also said that they would have liked residential care to allow them to have as normal a family life as possible. For example, having friends round for sleepovers and all the other things that are part of growing up for most young people in our society. I think it's important also to emphasise that the majority of view of the young people that we spoke to was that they believed they were better off in care than with their birth parents, as other members have alluded to. One boy who was doing well in his education and who was a really engaging and articulate young man said he believed that being taken into care had saved him from disaster and turned his life around. The young people did, however, want the experience of care to be improved. They wanted more permanence, and they wanted, above all, to be listened to, and they wanted their privacy respected and their views considered. Sometimes this simply means that those in authority should adhere to their own recognised good practice. It's already been mentioned by other members, the session in which the young people talked about the children's hearing system. In that particular instance, the young people said that if they wanted to make their views known to the Children's Panel privately, they had to ask others, such as their birth parents, to leave the room, and many felt too inhibited and intimidated to make that request in public. These children loved their parents, even when those parents had, for whatever reason, not been capable of providing them with a nurturing home and the stability that they needed. But the young people still didn't want to articulate their own needs because they were afraid of hurting the feelings of their birth parents, and on other occasions, other professionals and family members who were involved in their life. All the panel has to do is ask the child in advance if they would like a private session. But I was very encouraged. This issue, for anyone who's interested, is dealt with on page 13 of our report. And I was very interested in the evidence that we took from the children's reporter, which acknowledged this problem. And as I understand it, the 2011 Children's Hearing Act will specifically improve the situation. But as the report says, we are concerned about it, and we will return to the children's hearing system as a committee to find out how the 2011 Act is working in practice and whether it's improved some of those issues that the young people complained about. As the convener has already detailed, the committee's long-running inquiry has dovetailed with the introduction into Parliament of the Children and Young People's Bill, and many of the concerns that are addressed in the inquiry will be addressed by measures in that bill, and indeed measures have already been put in place by the Government, such as the establishment of the Centre of Excellence for Looked After Children in Scotland, CELSIS, at Strathclyde University. Presiding officer, other members have expressed their gratitude to the large number of witnesses who came in and gave their time to speak to the committee during our inquiry. But can I just also, I reiterate that, but can I also take this opportunity to say how impressed I was by the oral evidence from CELSIS? It gave me a sense of encouragement that we are taking this problem very seriously indeed at the highest level, and from now on we'll have a body of research and expertise to draw upon to tackle the issues facing the most vulnerable children in Scotland. And I very much hope that CELSIS work will inform good practice on the ground, and I know they're working closely with local authorities in the same way as they've helped to shape government policy for the good. I welcome the Government's response to our report and the Minister's letter to the committee, which reiterates the commitment to early intervention in tandem with early permanence. And I note too that the young people we spoke to had been affected by mistakes in the system that are already being addressed, and there's already evidence of change. For example, the trend for children becoming looked after and the trend for children becoming looked after at an earlier age. It shows that social workers are now acting more quickly to assess families and intervene. Having said that, there is some way to go, but I don't think there's any doubt from the Minister's speech and from the work that she's done on the Children and Young People's Bill that she is extremely committed to addressing this problem, and she is in no way underestimating the job that needs to be done. By putting the key elements of GIRFEC into statute and introducing things like the named person, through the Children and Young People Bill, local authorities will be legally required to improve permanence planning and collaborative working, which our report shows to be essential in tackling this issue. So although there's much work needs to be done, I do feel quite optimistic that we're going in the right direction and that we will do those young people justice. Thanks very much.
Very much. And we now move to the closing speeches, and I call on Liz Smith. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think this has actually been a very interesting debate, despite one or two scraps on the floor of the Chamber about some contentious issues. But I think it's interesting because it is dealing with what is a very complex and difficult situation. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to accept the complexities and the fact that we haven't been able to get everything right in the past. In fact, I was just thinking as we were debating this afternoon that if you look right back to the Orkney inquiry, which I think was in 1992, it too was dealing with some of the very complex issues about when it is actually right to remove children from their parents and take them into care. Ken McIntosh, and what I thought was a very eloquent contribution, he raised a central issue about the dilemma that I think we all face. I'm not talking about the named person, which is a political argument that we will have at other times in this Parliament fairly shortly. But the dilemma, I think, that Mr McIntosh has raised is one that is very challenging to us, because there are circumstances where, I think you quite rightly said, Mr McIntosh, that we do know there are circumstances where the answer categorically is yes, that we should remove the child from the parents. But there are sometimes circumstances where that becomes very difficult. And can I just pick up the comment from the convener? I absolutely agree with you in a situation where a sibling might be in a situation, just as Mr McIntosh has described, but that's not appropriate for the other child. And I think the complexity of that, the grave difficulty that faces the parents or the family concerned, but also those who are looking after them, I don't think we can very easily put ourselves in the places of these people who have to take that decision.
Maxwell.
Thank you, Member, for taking an intervention. I want to make clear that, of course, I was not underestimating the complexity of the difficulty faced by professionals faced with that situation. And, of course, every case must be looked at individually. But I do feel in certain circumstances, in those clear-cut cases, there were mistakes made in the past, given the evidence we received.
I think you're absolutely right on that. And, there is no question that it is one of probably the most complex issue that we've come up against. But I think sometimes, perhaps not just because of the mistakes that you mentioned in the past, it has been one of the reasons why people perhaps have held back from taking a decision which, as Mr McIntosh has described, is intrinsically the correct one to do. Now, we're very conscious, and I don't think the Minister is in any way underestimating the task in hand, although I do understand what Mr McArthur was getting at, because I think there are, Minister, a few issues in the report that perhaps we do need to deal with in just a little bit more detail. And if I could just flag these up to you just now, I think it was paragraph 34, where we've said quite clearly that there is an issue to do with terminology, which could be used a little bit more clearly and consistently. And perhaps that's something that we need to address, that there have been people who have given evidence to our committee who've maybe been slightly troubled by some of the wording that has been used, and I think it would be helpful if that terminology was perhaps a little bit more consistent. That was a point raised in the report, and it would be helpful if perhaps you could reply to that. I think also that in paragraph 39, there were very reasonable concerns raised by the committee relating to children falling through the gaps, and seeking clarity on the adequacy of the current resources, and that's been mentioned by a couple of speakers in that. Your response to that was that you obviously take the role very seriously in helping service providers to set that policy and resource framework, but I think we would expect that, forgive me, I think we want a little bit more detail as to exactly how you're going to do that, not just that you are making the point. Paragraph 51, the committee asked the government to explain how it will work with the local authorities to help child social work to carry out its role more effectively. And the government response is, and I quote, "It's a matter of public record that the Scottish Government's approach to improving the quality of children's social services centres on the needs of the child." Minister, I think we know that. It's just about if you can expand on that. I think it would be enormously helpful, because I think we do need to, well, perhaps in your reply you can give us a little bit more of that detail, because I think if we are to convince some of the doubters Yep, of course.
You're characterising some of the responses in a wholly kind of negative way, and you know, that wasn't the sum total of the response that we gave. And also in my remarks, I did note that there were, in terms of the social workforce, that we've established a strategic forum that brings together the sum of its parts to make sure that we can move forward the sector in a strategic way and drawing upon the kind of expertise that is out there. But I think, you know, maybe perhaps, you know, you're being a bit kind of unfair in how you're characterising some of the replies that we gave, which we hope would have been met with some of the spirit of consensus and cooperation that I think, you know, we should have between government and the work that you've done in the committee.
2 minutes, please, Ms Smith.
Minister, I have to say I think I was pretty constructive and positive in my earlier speech. And I do actually think I'm being positive today. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with the government's responses. What I'm indicating is we need to go a little bit further to give some clarity and some direction to those who, let's be honest, have been quite critical of some of the issues over the past. And I think I do come back to Mr Maxwell spoke earlier of issues that have stayed with him over the course of all our deliberations. The one thing that has struck me and has stayed with me throughout all this is that very strong criticism that we took from one of our witnesses, who was very clear that we hadn't moved on sufficiently quickly because he didn't feel that there was enough detail from the Scottish Government, and it wasn't just this Scottish Government, over a period of time. And it is that sense of frustration that I go back to, that I don't think we are doing enough to try to allay the fears, because we are finding it difficult to go into sufficient detail. Deputy Presiding Officer, in my last 30 seconds, could I just say that I think this has been a very enjoyable but nonetheless very challenging committee deliberation. I think the report has certainly thrown up some very interesting issues that we still have to resolve, but nonetheless I think in the spirit of relative consensus I think we've dealt with that, and could I thank the convener for his guidance throughout the committee on this, and that we have got a lot to think about. I do welcome a lot of the Scottish Government's responses, but there is still a very great deal to do if we are to finally resolve what must be some of the most challenging social issues in this country.
Thanks very much. Now call on Jane Baxter. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd just like to take a few moments at the start. This debate today has contained a number of very interesting and thoughtful contributions from members across the chamber, and also a wee bit of drama around the named person. So, with your forbearance, I just want to clarify that the Labour Party's position on the named person is that we fully support the principle. We're absolutely behind the principle of it. We're very worried about the resource implications, and we agree with the Royal College of Nurses and the Education Institute of Scotland that there needs to be a bit more work on the resources. For example, you could be looking at the need for an additional 450 health visitors, and if that was the case, then that would be an issue in terms of the successful implementation. So that's our position on it. We are supportive of the principle. It's not a problem. Thanks. It's clear that from all sides in this Parliament, there's a real willingness to improve the decision-making processes that lead to children being taken into care. And perhaps most importantly, the outcomes for those vulnerable children and young people in our society. And I'm struck by Liz Smith's comments about the frustration that's felt across the Parliament and beyond into the lack of progress on this issue. And not wishing to set a negative tone, but I think we're all agreed that we'd like to make progress as fast as we can, and hopefully where we are today is a good starting point for moving forward without further delay. The Minister, in responding to the committee's report, said that both early intervention and early permanence are needed to meet our aims of reducing the number of children on long-term supervision requirements and increasing the numbers finding secure legal permanence. I was also very heartened to hear the Minister say that she was committed to improving outcomes for children and young people across all levels of government, that the care and permanence strategy, that's to be welcomed, as was her reference to an all-systems approach, because I do think that's important. We can't have a piecemeal approach to this. It is so complex a field, with so many agencies and organisations, families and children and professionals involved, that we need a whole system approach to making improvements. And the fact that the Minister also referred to the very important role played by social workers. It's perhaps stating the obvious, but social workers are fundamental to improving services. and the Minister acknowledged that. But we've also had a number of concerns raised in the debate, and I was pleased to hear George Adams refer to this today, about the support that's available to social workers and other staff, and whether that's sufficient, and whether it's available when it's needed, and where that leaves staff if they don't get that support and that help, how they feel exposed and may well leave the profession or seek promotion to get away from the pressures of being on the front line. And any reduction in support or training for a workforce is always going to be worrying for morale, skills development and staff retention. And so I think we need to be very mindful of that as we move forward and keep the needs of the staff very much to the fore of our thinking. I was struck by Ken McIntosh's comments. I thought he raised a question about whether access to resources influences decisions about where children are placed, and that really made me think, because clearly if you've got good access to foster carers, children's homes and social workers, that might widen your choices, that might influence the options you've got for a child. And if you don't have those sorts of options, then obviously your choices are much more limited, and that may well influence decisions. It's not for me to say, but it certainly made me think. And I also thought he made very thought-provoking comments on the culture within social work and the role of judgment in good decision-making, and how staff can be protected in exercising that judgment. I think those are very valid points. In terms of the named person, just to return to that, we need to do some more work, and I know the Minister is aware of this, on when the named person passes on responsibility to the lead professional, and that will be a judgment as well, because there's a different role there, and that needs to be negotiated and agreed about how that's going to work. And we're not at that stage yet, but we know we need to do a lot more work on it. And we've heard of the report's conclusions that the sheer volume of ongoing work could suggest that deep-rooted problems are being addressed on an incremental basis. And I agree with what the convener said, that any action going forward must be coordinated and acted upon across the whole system again, and everybody has to understand the role. Just doing a lot of work doesn't necessarily achieve a lot of benefit, so we need to make sure that we work effectively and work well together to make the changes that are needed. And we must make sure in future that any progress is coordinated, and where possible the outcomes of any reforms are measurable and make real improvements to the decision-making systems, which have such a huge impact on the lives of children and their families. And several colleagues this afternoon made reference to the sort of starting point. And if we're going to start measuring the difference we make, sadly, what a very low point we're at for some of those indicators. Liam McArthur, Liz Smith, Neil Finlay all gave us figures which are very sobering and point clearly to how big the challenge is of improving those outcomes. And some of the worrying statistics that apply for children across all ages and in all settings, whether they're looked after at home or in a children's home, all the settings in all ages, not just early years, but as children perhaps grow up in care and move out of care. Neil Finlay made reference to outcomes for young people in the prison system and how that can be linked to the time in care. And it's really not good enough, and we have a chance here to make it better, and we've got to take that responsibility very seriously. Ahead of the debate today, I was in touch with a number of childcare charities and excellent organisations such as Who Cares, who do their very best to put the voices of looked after children at the front and centre of debates such as this one. And it might interest colleagues to know that I used to work in childcare, and I can remember Who Cares being set up more than 30 years ago, and it's really great to see the way it's continued to work and continued to fight and has never given up its campaign to have the voices of children built into our decision-making. And I'd like to pay particular credit to Who Cares in terms of this report and indeed the work we're doing on the Children and Young People's Bill. George Adams and others spoke about the impact on them of hearing the evidence from young people, and we really can't go forward without continuing to listen to those young people. But again, those young people want to know that we're serious about what we're doing, so we need to demonstrate that we have a conviction and that we want to make progress. They are watching us and they have expectations of us. I don't know if they're here today, but I hope they will note that we do want to work to improve the life chances for children in Scotland, and that this issue does not end with this debate this afternoon. The challenges which face our most vulnerable children have been described as a hidden problem which could shock the majority of Scots if they actually knew the day-to-day reality of life for looked after children. One campaigner said the solution lies in Scots caring, and for us to feel a sense of responsibility for all children in Scottish communities and Scottish society. And I made reference in my earlier speech to the need to change attitudes and change the culture. The report we've debated today does, I feel, go some way to exposing the hidden problems of our children in care. I look forward to hearing from the Minister in response to a number of the points which were raised today on the actions which we will be taking to improve the lives of Scotland's children. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Minister Aileen Campbell. 8 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I think it has been a thoroughly constructive debate, and the committee's report and the work has highlighted many areas that do require further attention. And what the debate has also shown is that regardless of political party or ideology, each of us here does share the dedication, commitment and passion to get things right for our looked after children and young people. And I hope that I've never tried to sort of portray a situation that is all okay. We do understand that we are on a journey here to try and make things right for children and young people, particularly those who need our care. And I would hope that in that spirit we can work together to ensure that the policies and opportunities that lie ahead do allow us to work together to ensure that we can get things right. Now, in my closing remarks, I want to break some of my remarks into themes in the hope that it captures much of what has been said, but to also demonstrate real and tangible actions that have been taken by this government, and recognising, of course, the progress that has been made by previous administrations, because I don't think this issue is owned by any one party, and I think that's been clear through the passion that people have shown in the comments that have been made. Now, in my opening remarks, I did say that both early intervention and early permanence are crucial in terms of securing the best possible outcomes for children who need us to look after them, and to find a way to intervene that has care which wraps around them and is effective and swift. So in that I do welcome what Liz Smith had acknowledged in terms of the needs of early intervention and early permanence. I understand what she's saying around making sure our language is clear. And of course we will always make sure that that is the case. But we are clear that where we talk about early years, that is different to early intervention. I think that goes back to some of the points that Liam McArthur made, that you can effectively intervene in a child's life and a young person's life at any time, and can do so effectively. But, you know, if there are other areas of clarity that we can improve upon, I'm happy to embrace that issue that she talked about.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that. I think the kind of example I'm referring to, which has come through the Children and Young People's Bill, is the fact that we use the term service providers in very different categories throughout the course of the bill, and I think that raises just a little bit of confusion about who the service providers are, and therefore the duties that are put upon them. I think if we can just tighten up that, I think it would be helpful.
Understand, and I'm sure some of that will come through in the kind of further debate that we'll need to have on the bill, and of course some of that will also be clarified further, any guidance that accompanies that. And of course, you know, there's always the opportunity to make sure that we consult fully on the guidance that will go with the bill, to make sure that things are absolutely clear in the minds of people who we are entrusting to deliver the services that will do and benefit the children that we care so much about. But I do want to respond a wee bit to some of the members who suggested there was a degree of complacency in our approach, and I would absolutely refute that. Our priority since the Scariff report in 2011 has been to inject PACE into reform. PACE is specifically designed to sustainably change practice across different systems. And remember, the need to bring together this systems approach needs to bring together councils, children's hearings and the courts to identify barriers and delays and to test solutions. So this new whole systems approach that I think has been universally welcomed by members across the Chamber will be a good step forward, and I'm very grateful to Aberdeen and Renfrewshire for agreeing to bear all and to show all local authorities how it can be done and where there is room for change. In response to Ken McIntosh, I absolutely agree that we need to intervene earlier, support families and make quicker decisions. But it's not just about quicker or firmer decisions. In many cases of low-level need, low-level parenting support provided in the long term could be better for that child, as opposed to permanently the reharming of that child. And this is important because of the understanding we have of the importance of attachment. Now, our efforts on strategic commissioning of resources within community planning partnerships for children's services will help deal with some of the issues around resourcing. And there's also an explicit commitment within the bill to family counselling, which I hope members will welcome, which will help families and help themselves and avoid a child needing to be taken into care, of course.
John Pentland.
Thank you, Minister. Like yourself, Jane Baxter mentioned in her closing speech that Labour agreed with the principles, but there could be a resource issue, something that the SNP's white paper says that childcare for 50% of two-year-olds would cost nearly £100 million. Considering today's autumn statement, when there's nearly £300 million coming in consequentials, would the Minister agree with me that £100 million from the consequentials...
This is not a question. Thank you. Minister Aileen Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Pentland.
And you know, I am always happy to take interventions, and I do happily take them from people who have contributed to the debate. But you know, the issue of resources, the financial memorandum does accompany this bill and sets out clearly. And if the member wants to refer to that, I'm sure he can get a copy and look at that. Now, I want to touch on also to GIRFEC, getting it right for every child. Now, GIRFEC is the overarching approach that we have for delivering children's services and for ensuring they are at the centre of design and delivery. Now, the E in GIRFEC, that I don't need to remind anyone, is for every child, and that absolutely means our looked after children. GIRFEC is about coordination of approach, and the evidence of its positive effect is bearing fruit. Fiona MacLeod, who started, I don't know why she started by saying that she had no expertise, because then she went on to say that she was the chair of a panel. I think that's a very good qualification indeed for today's debate. Now, Fiona spoke about GIRFEC and the named person. And while I don't want to rehearse previous debates about the named person, I do want to correct the misunderstanding that I think members have of this. This is not a scheme for a social worker for every child, and it does not dilute the role of the parent. It's about a support network for parents at its lightest touch, and to knit together support and to knit together the information about a child to ensure appropriate intervention. The results, as has been proven through Highlands, is about a reduction in inappropriate referrals to reporters, about more ability for resource to be targeted at the most vulnerable, and about redeploying saved resource into bolstering services. That holistic approach, if it's delivered across the whole of Scotland, I think will deliver huge impacts and huge positive impacts for children, in particular the children that we're talking about today. Now, that leads me on to the voice of the child, which has been a strong theme in itself. Now, Colin Beattie, Jane Baxter, Claire Adamson, the convener, Joan and George all mentioned the importance of hearing the voice of the child, and it's had a profound impact upon members who have had the privilege of listening to our looked after young people. And it's these real-life stories that do add the poignance to the crude statistics and remind us of the impact of our decisions on these young people. And I think it's always impressive as well when you hear from these young people who have been through the care system about how keen they are to make sure that they can put something back into the system and to make the improvements so that other young people don't have to necessarily suffer the same issues that they have had to deal with. And I want to talk about two young people that I listened to at a recent LACSIG event, which was where we launched the Staying Put guidance for young looked after people who are going through aftercare. And there was two stories about two different experiences of the care journey, one less positive and one very positive indeed. And I think that shows in itself that we can get things right for people, and it's that good practice that we need to make sure becomes the norm as opposed to the exception. Now, Joan McAlpine mentioned something around the children's hearing system, and I agree that the new national system gives us an opportunity to... sorry, I thought I had 8 minutes, I apologise. Okay. The new system allows us to bring about opportunities to ensure that there's a consistent approach, and we should remember that next year is the 50th anniversary of the Kilbrandon's report, which sets Scotland apart in the way that we deal with children who need additional help. I do want to just finally mention one last issue about the voluntary mentoring scheme, because the committee made very clear that we should make use of volunteers, and the mentoring scheme which I launched the other day will take us further down the route in terms of embracing the contribution that volunteers can make in terms of providing a stable relationship for young people who have lacked that in their lives. Now, there is opportunities to make things better for young people. The Children's Bill is one of them. I do appreciate the work of the committee and look forward to working further with committee members as we work to create improvements for young people who are looked after.
Many thanks. I now call on Neil Bibby to wind up on behalf of the committee. An exact 9 minutes now, Mr Bibby, please.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to close the debate this afternoon on behalf of the committee on what is obviously a very important subject. I think it's been a good debate with a number of very thoughtful and constructive contributions, and I'd like to join other members of the committee in thanking all of the individuals and organisations who have given evidence throughout the inquiry for their valuable contributions, and particularly the young people we heard from directly who have been through the care system, both at the Who Cares Scotland office in Glasgow, here in the Parliament, and particularly like to mention the young people from the Kibble who performed a very thought-provoking play in the Parliament to the committee. We know that all too often looked after children have poorer outcomes than other children, and as Stewart Maxwell set out at the start of the debate, the purpose of the inquiry was to investigate the decision-making processes involved in determining whether a child should be removed from the family home and whether these processes are delivering the best outcomes for children and their families. I think it is quite clear, both from the evidence presented to the committee and from the contributions we've heard this afternoon, that this is not always the case. We can do a lot more to improve these processes, and we can and we must do more for looked after children. The committee's inquiry covered a number of areas, and as has been said, there were recommendations for improvement made in almost every one. So it's clear there is work to do and action that needs to be taken. Many of the questions and issues raised are difficult and often sensitive, but Stewart Maxwell was quite right when he pointed out that open public discussion of these issues is positive, and I welcome the wider discussion that the committee's inquiry has stimulated around the issues of children and young people in care. As members have highlighted, there is a great deal of work going on in this area, not least the Children and Young People Bill, which we debated in the Chamber recently. However, there is a fear and a danger that a lack of overarching strategy means this work is not tied together. We need to be absolutely sure that problems are not being missed and that reforms are coordinated. And the key priority must be that any changes made are leading to better outcomes for children and young people. In the report, the committee recognised the role of local authorities, community planning partners, social work and the relevant public and third sector bodies in bringing about change. But what is clear is also the importance of the Scottish Government's role in leading this process. In that sense, I hope going forward the Minister and the Government will listen and act upon the issues and challenges highlighted by this inquiry and do so in a timely fashion. I think it is recognised across the Chamber that the pace of progress in improving the experiences of looked after children has simply not been good enough. Things need to improve, and they need to improve more quickly. I welcome what the Minister has said in terms of supporting the social work workforce, listening to young people about early intervention and the care permanence strategy. These are clearly good intentions, and I welcome the Minister responding to a number of the committee's questions, and I hope the Minister will follow up on the points that she maybe hasn't had time to address today or to the report in full. And there's been a number of issues that have been raised, regarding the use of terminology, more details in preventing children falling through the gap, and other issues that have been raised that we would probably welcome more details on. The issue of resources has been made by a number of members. At a time of budgetary pressure, the issue of resources is unsurprisingly extremely important. As members have said this afternoon, the committee heard evidence suggesting that decisions about removing children from the family home were affected by the availability of appropriate placements. That's why the committee repeatedly pressed the Scottish Government to outline the total sum of money all relevant bodies spend on protecting children and whether this spending is providing value for money. The Scottish Government have made it clear they believe that work on understanding spending and future demand can be best undertaken at a local level. But as Stewart Maxwell said, it is critical that we know the level of current spending and what it is delivering and whether spending is achieving the best possible results. In the report, the committee quite rightly questions how this approach will allow for a national picture of future spending and placements needs to be established. So I would again press the Minister to address how this fits in with and is fundamental to the Scottish Government's leadership role in this area. On the issue of resources, more than one member has referred to social work training. I don't think anyone would disagree that social workers have an absolutely key role in implementing improvements. So I would expect the Government to take action if evidence supports the claim that cuts to local government are having a severe impact on social work training. Presiding Officer, in terms of the decision-making process itself, we know that the decision to remove a child from his or her home is always an extremely difficult one. The committee report recognises this and states deciding whether or not a child should be removed from the family home and taken into care is one of the most difficult tasks carried out by public authorities. It has far-reaching consequences for the child involved, for the parents and for any other members of that family. It's no exaggeration to say that the future of the child is at stake, and therefore the decision has to be made at the right time and for the right reasons. So it's essential that we do everything possible to support those decision makers to get those decisions right. The inquiry was determined to listen to the views and experiences of children and young people and to put them at the centre of our report. I've talked many times in this chamber about, and many other members have, about the importance of listening to young people rather than just talking at them, and I think this is more important than ever here. What the committee heard from these young people was that often they feel, yes, certainly. Minister.
I agree as well that we need to make sure that we do watch our language around young people in terms of talking about them failing, that we have to make sure that we talk positively where we can about young looked after people. And does he support our investment in Who Cares and their anti-stigmatisation campaign that we collaboratively approach with Who Cares?
Neil Bibby. I think Who Cares is a fantastic organisation, and I welcome the support the Scottish Government offers to support the good work that they do in the campaigns that you've mentioned. And it's absolutely key to listen to those young people, and it's our responsibility to listen and then take those views on board and address the many challenges that this presents in terms of intervening in family life. Those challenges are not easy to address. But they are the ones that we must work to tackle if we are serious about improving outcomes for children and young people in care. Bernardo Scotland state that the biggest improvement to outcome for looked after children and young people would come through improving the consistency, speed and earliness of decision making on whether to take children into care. They also made the point that once that decision has been made, there should be an absolute focus on securing permanency for that child. On this point, I welcome the Scottish Government's policy of early permanence, and going forward when developing the care permanence strategy, I would urge the Scottish Government to act upon the committee's call for them to establish a shared vision of what success would look like for looked after children and ensure that resources and processes are built around that vision. I would also urge all those active in the process of reform to involve and listen to the opinions of children and young people in care, because the overriding aim must always be to the improvement of outcomes for looked after children, and this is more likely if we listen to the very people we are trying to help. Presiding Officer, the committee recognises the good work that has been taken forward as a result of GIRFEC and other child protection measures. On behalf of the committee, I also pay tribute to the hard work and dedication of social workers, education professionals and healthcare professionals across Scotland for the very challenging work they do, often in extremely difficult circumstances. However, the reality remains that current decision-making processes are not always delivering the best outcomes for children and their families. We therefore need action to improve these processes. We need action to improve outcomes for looked after children, and we need to improve the pace at which these reforms are being made for the benefit of these young people. The inquiry report says that the Scottish Government should take a leading role in this process if we are able to see the kind of improvements we all want to see in outcomes for children and young people in care.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. That concludes the Education and Culture Committee's debate on decision-making on whether to take children into care. The next item of business is consideration of motion number 8489 in the name of Liam McArthur on behalf of the Scottish Parliamentary corporate body on the appointment of the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. I call on Liam McArthur to move the motion on behalf of the SPCB.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll maybe set a little bit of the background here. I'm moving the motion today in my name on behalf of the corporate body, inviting members to agree to the appointment of William Thomson as the new Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. The Scottish Parliamentary Commissioners etc. Act 2010 provides that the Commissioners to be appointed by the SPCB with the agreement of the Parliament. The SPCB sat as a selection panel on 25th November 2013. The panel was chaired by David Stewart and the other members were Mary Scanlon and myself. On behalf of the panel, I would also like to thank Louise Rose, the independent assessor, who oversaw all aspects of the process and has provided the SPCB with a validation certificate confirming that the process complied with good practice and that the nomination of the new Commissioner is made on merit after a fair, open and transparent process. Turning to our nominee, William Thomson, is the choice of the panel from a very strong field of candidates invited to interview. Many of us here will know Bill, as he is one of the Parliament's Assistant Chief Executives. Bill has 25 years of public sector experience working at a very senior level for East Lothian Council before joining the Parliament at the outset in 1999. The Commissioner's role is an important one in securing high ethical standards in public life. One is responsible for investigating complaints about the conduct of MSPs, local authority councillors and members of public bodies. The Commissioner also regulates how people are appointed to the boards of public bodies in Scotland. The SPCB believes that the skills Bill has deployed here in the Parliament and his previous local government experience will more than equip him for his new role. The panel believes that Bill will bring to the post enthusiasm, professionalism, fairness and integrity, and I'm sure that the Parliament will want to wish him every success for the future in his role. In closing, Presiding Officer, I know that Parliament would also wish to record its sincere thanks to Stuart Allen for his considerable contribution. Mr Allen's term of office will end on 31st of March next year, and we wish him a long, happy and healthy retirement. Presiding Officer, I have pleasure in moving the motion.
The question on this motion will be put at decision time. There are two questions as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion number 8480 in the name of Stewart Maxwell on decision-making on whether to take children into care be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 8489 in the name of Liam McArthur on the appointment of the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. I now close this meeting and wish you a safe journey home.